Hello and welcome back to Run My Arts watercolor tutorial series. I'll be demonstrating a simple winter lakeside scenery using cool shades. The painting size is rather small, which is of A6 size. So I have marked the focal point on the paper whereby the upper half of the painting is slightly larger than the bottom part of the painting. Following that, I have made a simple sketch of a private jetty with a lamp, which is going to be the subject matter of this painting. So recently, I have also made a winter landscape painting with a simple sunset. So if you're interested to check out this tutorial, the link is in the description. So to kickstart this particular painting, I am pre-wetting the entire paper surface with some clean water. So basically I'm going to approach the wet on wet technique. Since this is a smooth looking winter landscape, so we need some smooth washes, and the only way to achieve this is by using the wet on wet technique. The first brush stroke that I'm going to make is for the lamp's light, which is of yellow shade. So over here you can see me mixing a few yellow paints, as in Indian yellow mixed with some light yellow. If you prefer to use one particular yellow shade, go ahead. I just love mixing a few shades to have some color variations. And since I need to only stain a small part of the painting, which is where the lamp position is, so I'm using a micro brush to stain this area. And I'm extending the same shade onto the jetty's surface. A little bit of contrasting shade would add some vibrancy into the painting, so I've decided to drop in a little bit of orange hue. You can get this by mixing your yellow with some reds. So over here I'm using a clean damp rigger brush to help the pigment move further. So basically I'm controlling the coordination of the paint movement. Alright, so before I move on to paint the first half of the painting, I'm just re-wetting it since the paper has dried quite prematurely. And the shade that I'm using for the sky is ultramarine, and I'm using a rigger brush because I want some fine brush strokes since this is a very small size painting. As I paint the sky, I am leaving some white spaces or empty spaces in between, just to suggest mist or cloud in the sky. And I'm also extending that same ultramarine shade onto the jetty surface as a reflection from the sky, since this is a snowy or misty winter look. So I would like to maintain that cool shade look onto most parts of the painting. As for the lake water, I've added a little bit of indigo into the same ultramarine paint, so you'll arrive at a darker shade. And this darker shade would help the jetty to stand out because I don't want it to look blended with the lake water. So as you make this painting, you should always ensure that the paper surface is always wet, because if you make the brush strokes on a dry surface, then you're gonna result in a different type of look, because wet on dry application is definitely sharper in appearance compared to wet on wet. So moving on, I'm painting the landscape details, which is an impression of a hillside right behind the lake. So usually hills are surrounded by hills, and I'm using a cool gray mix to paint in this hill. You can use ready-made gray, but I always mix in some dark blue shade as in ultramarine or sapphire blue with some burnt sienna. And once again I'm using a clean damp brush just to control the pigment movement in order to achieve the look that I want on this painting. So as for the Jetty walkways, which is closer towards the foreground of the painting, I'm introducing violet into the blue ultramarine shade, so that has a purplish hint onto it. And I'm painting this on a dry surface of the paper, so basically it's wet paint onto the dry surface of the paper. I'm just lightly using the micro brush to make these fine lines which mimics the appearance of a wooden jetty walkway. Following that, I am using a clean damp brush just to soften all those paint application that I made earlier. And right now I am using the same paint mix to paint in the handrails on the jetty walkways. Once again I'm using a micro brush since these are very tiny details. Now it's time to make a second coat of painting onto the lake, especially since it looks way much faded. I want the lake to have a more contrasting shade, as I mentioned earlier in this video. So before I paint, I have pre-wet the surface of the lake area on the painting, and this time I'm using purely indigo. So you want to be extra careful when you're painting in between those handrails, because you don't want the indigo shade to bleed onto the handrails shade. But even if it has, you can quickly clean them up with a damp brush or a clean dry paper towel. So since the hill painting looks a bit faded as well, so I will have to repaint it, and before repainting it, once again I am pre-wetting that hill area with some clean water and applying the grey shade that I used in the first layer of painting. A quick cleanup underneath the lamp area, because this is supposed to appear much brighter due to the light ray effect. So I need to sharpen the details of the handrails that are right underneath the light source. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna with the earlier yellow mix that I had. Now I will need some dark grey shade, so I'm mixing some ultramarine with sapphire this time instead of burnt sienna. And I'm going to use this dark grey shade to paint in some shadow details and marks on the handrails. Now as for the shadows to appear on the jetty walkway surface, I would want them to appear much softer, so I'm pre-wetting those areas before I drop in that grey shade. Now to paint in the lamp details, I'm using the same dark grey shade with a thicker consistency of the paint, which means it doesn't contain too much water or in a very diluted state. As I paint the lamp details, you will notice me using a damp rigger brush in between the painting process, because I'm using this brush to soften the hard lines or hard edges on the lamp painting details, because I want it to appear much softer instead of a very sharp lamp look. So now I have extended the grey shade by painting the docking area or the berth of the jetty, which is the end point of this jetty walkways, and I want it to appear in a darker shade, which corresponds well in line with the painting environment where it's a misty and snowy winter, especially when there is very less sunlight source. Therefore, the objects that are further from our viewpoint would definitely appear much darker. Painting a mild reflection of the jetty pillar or stand onto the lake water. Alright, done with the docking area painting. Now I need to darken the Jetty walkways. So I've added in a hint of the violet into the grey shade. And once again, before I apply those paint shade, I am pre-wetting the painting surface. And once again, I am modifying the coordination of the wet paint because I need to maintain some brightness and dark areas on the painting. As for some sharp highlights, I am using white gouache. You can use a white acrylic paint or even use a dry medium as in gel pen, pastel pencil and so on. Apart from highlights, you can also use this white paint to create some impression of snow. Spattering the same white paint to create impressions of snowfall. A little bit of water spritz to help those white paint bleed further, and it will result in some white blooms as in soft snowfall effect. So, how do you like this winter scenery of Jetty at the lakeside? I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, don't forget to hit the like and share button and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in another tutorial. Bye.